We've got quite a bit of information on the agenda for tonight. I want to start off by, first of all, okay, wait just a few more minutes. Okay, here we go. So I want to start off by giving an update on a saliva screening. As you know, in the December board meeting, the board approved moving forward with the saliva screen from Safeguard Surveillance. It is a surveillance screener, non-diagnostic, and we've been using it. If you look on our dashboard, which we'll get a chance to shortly, you will see where we track the number of screens that are taken by students and by staff. And if I am correct, based upon the screener itself, we've had 6 students who have been identified as presumptively positive, and 2 adults, I believe, if I'm correct, Karen, who have been diagnosed presumptive positive. That's not to say we've not had other students who were positive, nor to say we've not had other adults who were positive. These are the ones that were identified by Safeguard. We are in a process, we're still doing our screening, but we're trying to get more information. Last week, IDPH sent out a notice encouraging districts to not do surveillance screening unless they were a diagnostic tool. Today we got a whole different message. So that's why I'm kind of struggling around even how to say it. And so we reached out to Safeguard when we got the message from IDPH. Our legal counsel also reached out to Safeguard. We've been told at this point it's okay to continue to do the saliva screening, but Safeguard has made an application to get CLIA certification. I am not sure at this point where they are in that process, but once they get CLIA certification, then the Safeguard screener can be used as a diagnostic tool. Today, a new guidance we received from ISB and IDPH, it says that districts are not. I'm going to ask that people mute, please. What it said was that districts are not required to do screeners unless they choose to do so at this point. And so we are still in the process of using the screener. It says it is no longer recommended that symptom screeners be taken on school grounds, but schools may continue this practice if preferred. And this came today, so we've not had that discussion with our Board of Education, but I did want to update you on where we currently are with saliva screening. As we move to the 4th quarter, we will be revisiting how the drops are made. And we're also trying to fine tune our system because there's been some system errors in students who did or did not drop for saliva screening and in the communication process. And so we're trying at this point to tie that up. Are there any questions on me relative to the saliva screening? And I can't see if anybody's hand is raised. So I'm going to assume there are no questions. Okay. The next is the update on employee vaccinations. We have gone, as you know, on February 13th and February 20th, we partnered with the Oak Park Department of Public Health around getting our employees vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine. Any of those who had not already been vaccinated, any of those who chose to be vaccinated. This past Saturday, We had the people who were vaccinated on the 13th of February receive their second dose. And this coming Saturday, those who were vaccinated on February 20th will receive their second dose. And so we are looking at how we will proceed. We've had some of our teachers who are on accommodations say that they, now that once they have their vaccine, they would consider returning to the building. And so it is our hope to have a more accurate update at the start of fourth quarter with regards to on-site learning. I do want to go back to the saliva screening, if I might. I'm sure you saw in the Monday memo that we had, and we'll see in the metrics, quite a few people who are out on quarantine. I don't have those numbers with me. Sarah asked a question, if we know the percentage of faculty that's been vaccinated, because not everyone was vaccinated at the field and on our property, we don't have accurate numbers. We were also told by the Oak Park Department of Public Health that we can't request that. We can ask, but we can't mandate it. And at this point in time, we do not know the percentage of our staff that has been vaccinated. I hope that answers your question. With the saliva screening, when you see the metrics, you will see that we have 100+ students that are quarantined at this point. That is not to say that they have COVID. It is as a result of being in close contact for the most part with having COVID. And so we have quite a few of our athletic teams that are currently in quarantine due to close contact. And we'll go into that a little bit more when we get to the current metrics. Any questions from me on the saliva update or our employee vaccination? I do want to say, not only did we vaccinate our faculty and staff, our full-time faculty and staff, we also gave those who are on accommodations the opportunity to be vaccinated. Our substitute teachers, our hall and classroom monitors, as well as consultants and the local daycare in our building, as well as in the Oak Park community. There were 600 done at each of the clinics. I'm going to turn.
Could I just had a question, perhaps we're going to come back to it, but for the large number of students and student athletes who are quarantined, are you going to say more? I think I read this in the memo or elsewhere, but the nature of the exposure was in school, out of school, in the sporting, or can we say anything about that?
So what we know is most of the ones with athletes were done with a student who was positive and at practice. We do have 2 clusters of situations that are epidemiologically connected, but it does not rise to the level of an outbreak. The CDC and IDPH have deemed an outbreak as 5 or more cases that are epidemiologically connected. We have one that is tied to a classroom and basketball. We have another that is tied to students going for practice, and I think it's soccer or maybe freshman basketball. And so, but we only have 4 on each one. So we've been in close contact with the Oak Park Department of Public Health, monitoring the numbers. What you saw in my email is we've had a couple of parents who called, whose students tested positive as a result of a party. We don't know who hosted the party. We don't know where the party was, but they then went to either their team sport or practice. And so that was the result of that close contact. Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. So as you also saw in the Monday memo, and those of you who are parents received the survey, we are trying to bring more students back on campus. And so I'm going to turn it over to Greg to kind of speak to what we're looking at in the process for our in-person cohorts. Greg?
Yeah, thanks, Sterling. So there are, it's kind of a two-step approach. One is a very small baby step, and the other is a little bit more involved. So the first step is just to go through um, a list of those folks who would like to be in person, but for whatever reason, earlier on in the process, opted for remote. And we're really talking about 20 to 30 people who are in that boat right now. So what we're doing right now is just like running through our existing cohorts and just trying to find a way to plug them in where space allows, given class sizes. Should underscore that nothing I'm describing here at this point in any way changes the class size restrictions that we have in place. That's 6 foot rule that we have, that is intact regardless of what we're doing here. So what we're looking at is trying to maximize who's able to take advantage of the cohorts that we currently have. That's that first step. And so we're making that little micro adjustment right now. But what we're interested in doing, based off of the attendance that we see, is to see if, based off of who's really showing up, if we can increase the frequency of those cohorts. And so, and by that, I mean right now, as a reminder for everybody, we have 4 cohorts who are cycling through the high school in 2-day kind of increments for each of them. So within an 8-day span of time, an 8 school day span of time, all of our cohorts are in the school for all of their class periods. And what we see right now for our attendance rates has been a pretty clear kind of regression since we first started in-person learning. We anticipated this from talking to other schools in the West Suburban Conference and from other groups that we're part of. We've heard this from other campuses, but regardless of whether we heard it, it's happening right now, and it's very clear what it is. We started off at about an 80% attendance rate, meaning that 80% of the kids who said that they were going to come into in-person learning are actually showing up. And we have slipped all the way down to the mid 50s for our last go around with the cohort. So to put that in a little bit of perspective, keep in mind that we had about 2,000 families who initially wanted to be in person. We had 4 cohorts, about 500 kids. You're talking about 80% of that at the high end. So, about 400 out of that 500 coming in person. And that has dwindled now to somewhere between 200 and 300, right? The high end of the 200 range. So it is room, there's room, in other words. I mean, that's the story here. And so we put out that survey last week. It's still in play through the 15th to get a feel for who is out and would want to come in. That'll help us a little bit. We also put in guidelines for eventual exclusion. If folks haven't attended through that window that we have out there, and somebody might need to remind me of the exact date. I don't want to misspeak.
15th.
Is
Oh,
it the
and Monday's
15th?
it's this Friday because
It's a
Monday's
12th, I think.
Monday's a remote day, so it's this Friday, but unless they are on that extenuating list.
So the 12th is what it is. Yeah. So, if folks have not attended at all to that point, then we're going to be reaching out and saying, look, we need to sacrifice a spot so we can, get more people in more frequently. And then we're going to kick it back to our programmers next week and have them redo our cohorts, maximizing the capacity of the rooms we have in place. We've gotten a lot of questions if we think we're going to be able to get all the way up to, in effect, combining 2 cohorts, doing 50% of the folks who want in one, in the other. From what we see right now, that very well may be possible, but we are going to let the programmers kind of figure that out. I think it's incredibly reasonable to presume that going down from a 4 cohort rotation to a 3 cohort rotation is in the offing. I mean, that's likely possible. And if we can pull off a more frequent rotation, so there's simply just 2, that'd be fabulous. So we're looking to see what we can do, and we will get word out as soon as we have that. We're looking at a few other things to optimize that process, but for right now, that gives you the basic gist of it. So if there are any questions, I'll be happy to do my best to answer.
You may want to add, Greg, that once we are able to determine our cohort groups, we will send that information out, but that will also adjust our saliva screen drop-offs.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I'll jump in. I have a couple of questions, as I generally do. One, I noticed a couple. First, I'll start. If we can get close to 2 cohorts, would there be any consideration of removing some of the extra desks that are in the classroom to allow more desk spacing from 6 feet? Because I know in several of the classrooms, right, we didn't take out the extra desks. We kind of shoved them to the back or to the sides, right? If those extra desks were removed, although I don't know where they would go, but if those extra desks were removed, right, would we be able to put more desks in those rooms at the 6 foot spacing? So
Yeah.
that would be question one. And then follow up to that is I know that the ISBE metrics, or the new revised metrics that I saw that were attached, now says 3 to 6 feet. Would we ever consider going to 5 feet or 4 feet to get us to be able to go down to those 2 cohorts? So I know that's a loaded question that you don't know the answer to, but
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I'm going to take that one and say we just got it today. And so I've started reading it. You was sent to you when we received it.
gotcha.
So because we knew it would probably come up tonight, so we're still going through it ourselves. And once we've gone through it, we'll have a better idea of what we can do. I believe the language says 3 to 6 feet when possible, but that 6 feet was still the standard. The 3 to 6 feet also in the document speaks to students and fully vaccinated staff.
Yes.
If the staff is not fully vaccinated, it's still the 6 feet. I did get that far.
I did. Yeah, I think that's about as
Well,
far as I got, which is if the teachers are if the teacher aren't vaccinated, the
Yeah.
teacher has to stay 6 feet.
Right.
So,
Yeah, so go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, and Ron could probably, once Greg finishes what he has to say, Ron could probably ask the question about moving the chairs.
I mean, those are the 2 topics. I think they're both addressed by those 2 things. So Ron, yeah, feel free.
So,
All right, Ron.
how you doing? As it pertains to removing the desk, that's like hardly unlikely because we don't have room anywhere in the school to store the desk, and we don't have room on the property to put a storage container. Being that we're doing construction around the outside of the school, a storage container would block the back of the area where we're doing SRC construction, and we can't put it in front of the building. So those options are out. And the desks that's in the rooms that stayed in the rooms, if we could add more students to rooms, we just remove the "Do Not Sit Here" stickers, and the students would just sit inside of one of the desks that's already there. So they're there in areas. Say for instance, there are 20 desks in a room, and we put "Do Not Sit" stickers here in certain different areas. We just remove one of those stickers and strategically place that desk so that a student stays within 5, 6, 3, 4, 5, 6 feet away. We're at the maximum distance now, so reducing it would just be reducing a sticker that's on a desk.
Okay, someone asked me to revisit the IDPH. I'm looking at it. It says, additionally, IDPH is revising the recommendation for social distancing for in-person learning. Social distancing for in-person learning is now defined as 3 to 6 feet for students and fully vaccinated staff. Maintaining 6 feet remains the safest distance, but schools can operate at no less than 3 feet in order to provide in-person learning. Unvaccinated staff should maintain 6 feet social distance as much as possible because adults remain more susceptible to the infection than children. Strict adherence to social distancing must be maintained when face masks are removed in limited situations and monitored by school staff.
Right.
I have one question that this brings up. could staff, I mean, they would have to self-identify as being vaccinated, right? I mean, we can't identify which of our staff are vaccinated.
Right, we asked Oak Park when we were doing the vaccination clinics, if they would tell us at least what employees did not show up for the vaccinations or who were vaccinated. And they told us it was medical information. They could not give it to us. I guess the piece that I wanted to emphasize before, and like I said initially, I was pulling it from my memory, was the 3 to 6 feet. And then that was for students and fully vaccinated staff. So we
Right.
still need to dive into this document and dissect it.
So I only raised that point, and again, I think the interpretation with other schools I talked to today is that 6 feet they label as the safest, but by that notion, 8 feet, 10 feet, and 12 feet is even safer. This is, I think, being widely seen as creating an opportunity at 3 to 6 feet. And so the reason I brought it up, for sure, it needs to be digested. The context in which I brought it up is I recognize how much work there is to rejigger the cohorts, and I would just predict that a close read and additional consultation on this will open the door to 3 to 6 feet if there's an appetite for it among the community and the district. And so I just hate to see people go through the work of shuffling cohorts once and then 2 weeks later perhaps shuffling them again. So that's why I raised it now.
Excellent point. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, just to underscore that very last point there, I appreciate that quite a bit. And there is no doubt that the window that we have in front of us to shift cohorts is finite. We're able to get this information in from the community by the end of this week. And this is even excluding any of that 3 to 6 foot conversation. Next week, we'd be able to kind of get this in the hand of our programmers and see what we can do. And the soonest we'd be able to make adjustments, and I think this was in Dr. Pruitt-Adams' communication from last week, would be the week, it would be after spring break. And so another chance after that to adjust those cohorts would really put us into a situation where we're talking about, stumbling right upon the end of the semester. So this is really our window to get this right. So I appreciate that sense of urgency.
Thank you. Is there any other feedback or questions about what we're doing for in-person cohorts? We've heard about looking at different square foot, different footage for social distancing. Is there anything else? I'd be interested if you know how we could get, we anticipated some of our parents removing their students from hybrid when they realized that, one, there were only a couple of students in the classroom showing up, and two, if the bulk of their child's teachers were out for accommodations. However, there are some in our district, as well as in some of our surrounding districts, that superintendents believe that some parents are waiting for the weather to truly break and for after spring break. So I am just hoping that all of the parents who are currently enrolled for hybrid will fill out the survey if they're not going to come back, because we do, as Greg said, have families that are wanting to come in and fill those spots. And I would hate to not be able to give them a spot because we're holding on a spot for someone who does not plan to show up, but they're holding it in anticipation of if they change their mind or if they hear that more students showed up. That's what's happening in some of our surrounding districts. Any other suggestions, comments, insights?
I think this is Jen, and I just think one point of clarification I think people are looking for parents is, if their student had the opportunity of being in the building 6 days so far, so 3 rotations, but they've only come 1 day out of those 6 days, will they be forced to go remote? It's like, is it an all or nothing? Is it a partial or nothing? And I think there are some parents who are curious for that response.
So we have approached it right now as an all or nothing thing, Jennifer. So that's where it is now. We're going to take a look at that data and see what we think we can do with that data once we have it in. And if it's possible that, you know, your kid has only been in once, I can't promise that we aren't going to make a phone call and say, hey, where do you sit on this? You know, because the goal is the goal, right? It's to optimize our rotations. But for right now, if the only hard line we've drawn on this land is 0 versus any. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's to open this up. We initially said if you signed up for remote, you'd stay remote. But as you can see, we took a step back. We looked at our data and said, okay, let's get some more kids in. But if I agree with Greg, if they don't show up at all and they've only shown up once and they've not reached out to us for an extenuating circumstance, you know, something has happened that they can't come, then they will more than likely get a call and lose that slot. If they call us, and we've had some who have called us with those extenuating circumstances, and so we are holding a spot for them.
Joylyn, can I just add that I think if there's some uniformity in the teachers who are going to be required to be in the building, there might be more predictable responses from families, because I think that's also something that, you know, families are interested in kids going to class with the teachers there.
Mm-hmm.
And if the teachers are not going to be there, then parents are less, you know, anxious to have their kids in the class, and kids are less anxious to be there. And so I think that also causes a lot of back and forth when, you know, people are making decisions based on that information. And I think that information changes often class to class and teacher to teacher. And so that leads to a lot of unpredictability in attendance, I think.
You are absolutely correct. The difficulty for us right now is one of the things we did second semester that was different from first semester. First semester, teacher didn't want to come, we didn't make them come. If it was childcare, so be it. But for second semester, they had to have something from a medical professional saying that they needed these accommodations. And so by law, we can't make them come back if they still need the accommodation. It is our hope, though, that as everyone is being vaccinated and that they see that the transmittal rate is going down, that some of them will come back with a letter from their medical professional saying they can return to work. And I agree with you, the more staff we have on site, then the more we'll probably have students who show up. Because, you know, I can't say if I was a parent and only 3 of my child's teachers were on site, if I send my kid. The other thing that I think we have to deal with is the majority of our students who are off-site are some of our most marginalized students, specifically our Black and Brown students. And there's a resistance to some of our families because of the fear for COVID, of sending their child to school to possibly contract COVID. And then that same fear exists with getting a vaccination. So that's something else we've got to try to figure a way of getting those families that have opted out to come in. Another thing I've noticed, we have quite a few seniors who it's their senior year and they've just opted to stay remote, particularly those who are doing well. Any other comments or statements on that? If you have some ideas of how we can get people in, truly appreciate it.
You know, just to expand on what Dr. Barbado said, I think, you know, those who I've seen, you know, because I'm the one generally on social media like a crazy person, you know, most of it has been, you know, the lack of teachers in the classroom. I would say that's the number one cited reason of, well, my kid was going to go back, but they're sitting on Zoom and there's not a teacher in the right. So, and I know it's your second point. I know they've asked for medical accommodations. Is there any way to go back now and say, now that you've been vaccinated, is that medical accommodation still in place? Can you even have that conversation with those teachers? Or is that taboo as, you know, or not legal as well?
We are looking into that. What is the hybrid reach for most kids at risk? Could you clarify, Dave? You're muted.
Why don't I just speak? It certainly has been a question that's dogged me. I know that everyone on the medical group was not necessarily looking to try and get their own child into the school. And I think that often there was some question whether or not we were worried about the Black and brown students. And, you know, I can speak for everyone on that group. There was absolute concern about that. And that was also one of the goals of trying to get the most challenged children back in the school, because obviously, you know, you don't need to do a study to know that hybrid's not working for them.
Mm-hmm.
It's really kind of a burning question. How well has that been received? And, you know, you posed the important question, what do we do about it? And I don't know if there's simple answers, but I imagine everyone's been thinking about it.
We put so many supports in place that we would hope would support our kids. We opened a resource room for students who just need to be there for the contact, to have someone help them. And we kept those rooms open even when we're closed sometimes. We did the learning labs for our diverse students. We've put in, the SEL in the afternoon so that if you are a remote kid and you really need some assistance, you have the latitude for that as well. We're missing something, and I don't know what that something is outside of one-on-one conversations, and I know our counselors and our deans have called. Hold on, Mr. Sofer, I'm gonna ask you to speak that out loud. So we're still investigating how to do that, Dave. Mr. Sofer, do you want to speak to the question you put in the chat?
Sure. In talking to my students when they were, sorry, my son is saying goodnight. When they were saying whether or not, thanks, buddy. When they were saying whether or not they were coming back, they whether their teachers were there, and I teach only upperclassmen, so perhaps it's not indicative of the whole school, but whether teachers were there was like a factor, but it seemed to be more of a factor for kids who had opted in and then didn't stay, as opposed to the kids who had opted out altogether. So I think if the goal is maximizing students being present, and we're trying to identify what is the reason that they're either opted out or that they opted in and then went out, I'd want more data. And I think, well, I hear that assumption that it's about teacher presence. I don't know that we have real data to suggest that. And so I think we just want to make sure we're kind of making data-driven and not assumption-driven decisions.
And you're absolutely correct. My comments about our most marginalized students not coming, it is anecdotal, just, things people have said to me, emails I've received on why people have chosen not to stay. Even conversations I've had with some of our students on why they're remote versus in person, but it's not a data collection set.
I just think also, just to reiterate, I think it really is the number of kids who are in the class. My freshman in her models of physics class, she has 9 kids in her big lab classroom and she loves it. But, even for my junior, I think other than that one class with 9 kids, there are probably fewer than 5 in all of the rest of their classes. There was a woman posting on the parents page about, her daughter's PE class is supposed to have 4 kids in her class in person in her cohort. And she's been the only one who has shown up in that PE class for all of the rotations and had to do Zumba with the PE teacher by herself. And, that really doesn't make her want to be there when she's the only one who has to do those kinds of things.
It's a good point. Dr. Barbados put in the chat that maybe if we set aside some time and invited our parents, particularly, and Dr. Barbados, I'm paraphrasing what I saw, so correct me if I'm wrong, and that we try to get those parents who are concerned about, you know, the health indicators of having their kids in school, and vaccinations, and maybe have some type of parent meeting, be it virtual or in person, because I think you guys know we're back to in-person board meetings, but maybe have a session where some of the members of the advisory committee would be willing to have those conversations. I would be willing to look into that to see if we can make that happen. But I'd like some, you know, and I saw someone echo the sentiment. At this point, I'm willing to try.
To clarify real quick, and it's kind of what Mr. Sofer said as well. Are we trying to identify people who never opted in the first place? Or are we kind of really looking at the people who opted into hybrid, came once, or just never showed up at all? Because it's kind of two different subsets of folks, right?
Are you talking about for the conversation?
Yeah, for like a conversation. Are we trying to get those who have opted into hybrid to say, why aren't you coming? And then try to get them to come back?
And
Right.
I don't think that's the conversation Dr. Barbado was.
Right, that's what I'm trying to clarify.
Yeah, Dr. Barbado, am I correct? It was more those other individuals who are apprehensive about sending their child back due to concerns for COVID. Am I correct?
Yes. I think especially moving forward, you know, this is going to be around for a long time. And we're in a really good place now relative to where we have been. And I think this is where we're going to be for a little while. And the vaccine stuff is totally exciting and changing the course of this for everyone. And so I think the more education we have, particularly to people who are skeptical or nervous about it, would be really helpful. I don't know what the best way to do that is. And I know Steve mentioned making sure that people from appropriate groups are, you know, giving that information, and that we're representing people appropriately. But I think that's going to be really important moving forward. I don't know, you know, I don't know how important it's going to be in the rest of this year. And truthfully, there's a part of me that feels like everybody has a choice, right? To do in person or to do remote.
Right now.
And, you know, for the rest of the year, I think what's really important, as long as we're going to have those options from an equitable standpoint, is that both of those options are good, right? So that no matter who is in what group or choosing which option, those groups of people are getting the same equal education, right?
Absolutely.
So I think for the rest of the year, that's a really important thing to focus on. And I think for the fall, we're going to have to focus on making sure that everybody's comfortable, because I think things are going to, you know, I'm assuming that we're going to be able to move forward, and that we need everybody to feel comfortable. And whatever it takes to do that, I think is what we need to be focusing on now.
And what we've been told, which kind of leads to Dave's question, which is going to come up when we talk about planning for next year. What we've been told by ISB in the 2 superintendent meetings yesterday, and what I started reading in today's document, is this year through the governor's, you know, executive order, people had an option. And what we've been told is next fall, we should plan to have full in-person unless a student has some extenuating medical conditions where he or she cannot be on site. We've also been told, depending on where the country will be, we should have another form of a hybrid in our back pocket in case we need to pivot. But that remote learning, unless it's under an executive order again, based upon where the country is with regards to COVID, it won't be an option to say, I want to do remote. So that's one of the reasons it's really important to educate our families who don't know all the answers, who have these questions in their heads, whether it's safe or not. So I think it's important that we try to do something to educate them so that they do come back in the fall with some of those apprehensions eased and gone. We're going to talk about planning for next year in a bit, but if we're ready to move on to the next thing, I can't see everyone, so if someone's hand is up, I have no clue. Okay, so Karen, you want to go into the metrics, what's on our dashboard and what people can see on a regular basis?
Yeah, I can. Can you stop screen sharing, Jonah?
Lisa screen sharing. Lisa, can you stop screen sharing so Karen can share her screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay, so most of you have probably been on our dashboard, just in case you hadn't, we wanted to take a look at it. As you know, we shifted our indicators to lowest, moderate, highest risk of transmission in schools versus really hard and fast numbers. When I look at this here, let me refresh because I did this first key indicators. I don't know why the box isn't showing up bold the way it should, but this one has been updated. The number of epidemiologically linked cases, like Dr. Pruitt-Adams said, we have two clusters of 4 that we're keeping an eye on. So that is, so really, despite all the kids on quarantine, we are still at the lowest risk of transmission and you know, moving ahead with full hybrid right now. You've all seen this. The saliva screener totals. I'm working on my laptop here, so I don't know if you can see everything. We report on every batch of saliva samples that we have submitted since we went hybrid on February 1st. And like Dr. Pruitt-Adams said, we have had 6 cases identified through the screener, 5 among students, 1 among staff. So if you're interested in any of these submission totals, those are updated as we get them. This is our current exclusion summary. And as you can see, we have a lot of kids out on quarantine right now. And that is primarily, for instance, I think it was one of the basketball teams, like they hadn't broken into training pods yet. So they were just having tryouts. So everyone who was there was put into quarantine. So this is the highest number we've had in quarantine so far. And obviously that's a concern, but we're keeping an eye on it. And then the weekly cases per 100, we're looking good there for both locally and the county. And then the positivity rate also is below our thresholds. So these dashboards get updated once a week with the rolling 7-day averages. And there is a bit of lag. There is a lag in the Cook County data. As you can see here, for instance, Oak Park is updated, but we haven't gotten the data yet on Cook County. So I don't know, are there any questions about what we have here on the dashboard?
Karen, this is Jen. I do have a question. I just wondered, so for the screeners that were positive for screening, I'm just curious if they all translated to a positive diagnostic test, just from an accuracy standpoint.
Yes, all of those positive saliva screeners turned out to be positive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you know if we have had any false negatives from the screeners? Anyone who tested negative who then somehow ended up in the school building and later tested positive in any way, shape, or form?
We've had a few instances where somebody had submitted a small handful of instances where somebody has submitted a saliva sample that was not positive, and then within 48 hours was the most common thing we had seen. 24 to 48 hours afterwards, they got tested positive for COVID due to another test they had done, a PCR. And so those kind of forced us to raise a brow and see if, really where are we with this? But those aren't the same thing as false negatives. There's just a proximity there that makes us question. But we don't have anything, like we don't really have the way our system works. We don't have samples. We haven't had yet a sample, submitted on the exact same day and then a positive COVID test, within, that exact same window that saliva came in. Our nurses, I think Julie might be on this call actually. She might be able to correct me on that, but I don't believe we've had that like perfect kind of overlap to really answer that question.
So you heard us also say that we're going to revisit the saliva screen drops, as Greg indicated, when it shows up. So the way the system is now, if we do a screen one day, we will get the notice that someone needs to be referred for a clear PCR test. The difficulty for us is we hope that our parents drop on the day they're supposed to drop and not drop like after the 6 o'clock drop, but the day before they're supposed to drop. That's part of what adds to that time span in between. And then when our athletes drop, we think is maybe adding some confusion. But as Greg said, it's not been, we don't have any concrete evidence it's a false negative. Any other questions on this? So if Lisa, if you take the screen back. So here's where we really need your help and insight. If you could go to show the next item. The next item is as we plan for next year. You heard me indicate a few minutes ago that it is our hope that we will be in phase 5. If we're in phase 5, everything's back and it's just things as they were prior to COVID. However, we've also been told, and I think the medical professionals have feel the same way, that COVID's going to be around for a while. And so we've also been told to have some form of a hybrid plan in our back pocket. So I'm going to turn over to Greg and Karen. As the steering committee starts to plan for next year, we've reached out through a thought exchange to get some feedback. So I'll turn it over to Greg and to Karen to talk about thought exchange. You're muted. Thank you.
I don't have a whole lot to say, except if you haven't seen the thought exchange, I encourage you all to take a look and scroll through the thoughts and do it occasionally over the next few days to give us your feedback. We're doing this for students, the community at large, and our teachers. And so far, it looks like, Karen, make sure I'm reading this correctly, we have about 450 people who have gone in and given us some good feedback, 490 different comments, and people are going in there. What's really cool about this is you can see the rate to which people are reading through the comments and giving feedback on those comments, starring them or adding. And it looks like 11,295 different kind of ratings have been given of those different comments that are in there. So that's pretty cool.
So far, the highest participation is from students.
Oh, that's
wonderful.
Yeah.
So it's good.
Could you share with the group the type of questions that we're asking thoughts on? Because I don't think everybody in this group is a parent or a staff member. And so maybe they too, I was hoping, from what they've heard from their friends, their neighbors, social media. Maybe they have some thoughts as well that they can share with us tonight.
Sure. Karen, as I'm looking at this, I don't see, you gave a nice little introduction into this whole business. The question itself is just literally, this has been a challenging year in education. What have we learned this year that should guide our planning for 2021, 22 and beyond? And then we gave a little bit more of a context to help kind of get people going into the conversation. But this has been a question and a topic that has permeated over the last month, no matter kind of what group you're part of in education, and I'm sure in other domains as well, but whether I'm chiming into the Chicago area curriculum development group, whether I'm talking to the West Suburban folks, Joy Lynn is talking to her superintendent's group in the area, they're all asking this question, like, how is schooling going to change even once we're able to be back? And it's, we're hopefully completely past this pandemic. What might school look like? And the conversations have been fascinating. So the feedback that we're getting from the various stakeholders is going to help us in a lot of different ways, in ways that we can't even predict too, I'm sure. So I really encourage everybody to chime in and give us your feedback.
Yes, we would appreciate some feedback from you guys in this room about what you've heard, what you've observed, and we're asking staff and everyone alike. This is how we want to give everybody a voice. We want to make sure that we hear all that's out there. This is a very insightful group. So is there anything that you think we should really focus on and consider?
I'll give just two examples, and the second one I really want to share. The top two highly rated thoughts, the first two that kind of rank out so far, midway through stream. Number one is keep parent-teacher conferences remote. I love that one. We got a lot of that immediately after we did that remote, and not too surprising that we see it here. The absolute second highest rated comment we have, Mr. Sofer. This goes to you and a lot of other teachers. Our faculty is extremely hardworking, thoughtful, student-focused, and adaptive, and then it goes on from there. A lot of positive feedback on that one, and a lot of stars. So it's really good to see, suggestions like that and that positive feedback coming in.
So one of the things I think that we should carry over goes back to Dr. Barbados' comment and Dr. Weber about having some education sessions or information sessions for our families as we prepare for next year. And we probably need to do that sooner rather than later, so that parents know prior to the end of the school year what to expect for next year. Anything else?
Joylyn, if I could just add, the first thing I want to say is that even though my kids have complained about having very few kids in their class, that's the first thing I hear about, and particularly my sophomore, who I think would be happy to stay in her bed and do school from there for the rest of her life. So much to her dismay, I had to really encourage her to do the in-person learning. And she's come home every day thrilled at being there. She's a teenager, so thrilled in school is not necessarily what you would expect it to look like, but she really, even for her who is, introverted and has social anxiety and prefers to be home and not be forced to do any of the things that she needs to be doing and navigating the building, she comes home and the first thing she says is, Mom, it was really exhausting and I was the only person in my chemistry class, but I'm really glad that I went in today. So I think for almost everyone that I've talked to, even given the low attendance, the kids are really thrilled to be in the building.
That's awesome feedback. Thank you.
Yeah. The other thing that I would say in terms of preparing for the fall, I think that none of us are ready to meet the mental health needs of particularly our children. I think probably our whole society, but particularly our children. As we get back to in-person, I think there's a ton of unrecognized anxiety and depression. And, you know, I've been doing this for 20 years, and in pre-COVID times, I would see a child maybe every 2 weeks who had depression or anxiety or school avoidance or failing school. And in the last 2 weeks, I see 4 to 6 children a day with anxiety or depression or really significant school problems that are significant. This isn't just, oh, I'm feeling a little bad. This is 4 to 6 kids a day out of the 30 kids that I'm seeing who are really, really struggling. And so it's incredibly hard to find resources for these kids. Therapy places are inundated. Families can't, you know, find the resources that they need. And I think I'm probably seeing more than you guys are seeing in school, because a lot of these kids aren't in school or using those resources. So I think that's another thing that I would love to be involved in. I think we need to be ready for that to be, you know, even though everybody's going to be thrilled to be back and feel like things are, you know, normal, if you will, I think there's going to be a lot of work to be done for these kids' mental health.
You know, Dr. Barbado, I'm going to take you up on that and try to get you in touch with Shirley McLeod, who's in this group, and with Linda Parker, who is the Director of Student Support Services. I say that because they are working diligently to try to get some things in place. Cheryl Land is our new trauma-informed intervention specialist, as well as, oh, and also SPED. And I sit on the board for Community Works out of the Community Foundation office. And so DePaul University put in for a grant that we recently approved that will allow us to have a CARES coordinator, a 0.75. So it's not a full position, but it's a 0.75 to deal with some of the mental health issues that you speak of, and also a psychiatrist who will be available to us. And they already had the psychiatrist at D97, and they see the value of, they've been working with Linda Parker to bring that to Oak Park, and they've told us we will be their top priority. So, you know, if we can get something set up, Linda reports to Greg, maybe get something set up as we are working on the MOA to bring to the board, so that in next year we can have these wraparound support services in place.
And just to chime in, this is Cheryl Lynn. Sorry, I don't have my screen on. I'm like trying to get my family together as well. We just received today notification that we have been approved for a fellowship through the University of Chicago for their trauma responsive educational plan, in which they help us create a strategic plan specifically to deal with bringing our students back after COVID. So it would be great to meet with you, Dr. Barbado, so that you could be a part of how we implement new strategies and programming as we prepare for our students for next year.
Wonderful.
I would love that. Thank you.
Any other suggestions?
I mean, if we're talking about, you know, again, to what Mr. Sofer said earlier, is if we're really focusing on communicating to the people, ideally that it's the people who opted out, right? I mean, somewhat to a lesser extent because again, the people who opted in, but then haven't shown up, I think is less to do about safety mitigations. I think there's a lot of things out there, but it seems like the folks who opted in but aren't showing up, it's more to do with their kid, you know, there's the social anxieties, being the only kid, you know, some of those things. But if we're really focusing on those families who opted out around safety concerns, right? And you kind of see the buzz already. Well, we're not going to have vaccinations for 15 and under. You know, it is that concern. So I think, you know, one of the better ways and what I've seen work a little bit is, you know, how can we use the data that's out there? You know, how can we use the data and reinforce that, hey, CDC looked at 3 million students and schools aren't super spreaders. How can we look at our own data? And yes, we have a lot of kids in quarantine because we're erring on the side of caution, but when all this nets out at the end of the year, how many COVID cases were transmitted in the school, right?
Right.
What are those other things we can do to educate them? And then, obviously, as you spoke, there is concern of how, COVID is negatively impacting families of color, and that is a real concern. And if I remember correctly, though, after first semester, we had a really high percentage of kids getting Fs for the first time, right? And if I remember that correctly, that also disproportionately affected kids of color, right? So that is a really tough situation to say education, health, and those things, and how we can, understand the academic implications and help families better frame, some of that decision-making process of like, is how does that work? And I'm curious too, how do we have graduation rates that are being impacted? Do we have kids who have failed classes their senior year and now are at risk of not graduating because of the remote learning environment? So as much as we can learn from our experiences to then say this is why it's important to go back and it's safe to go back because of all of this, I think we have a better chance of getting more parents on board, because I'm just hearing they just don't believe it's safe.
Great information. Thank you. And this is all being recorded, so if you don't see us writing, we're recording all this information.
I just put that on my list.
Any other suggestions, look fors? Is there a national data about the failure rate in high schools disaggregated by remote? That's in the processes, is my understanding. Because we've asked that question to superintendents quite a bit, and the impact on mental health as well. So, but we don't, it's still in the making. And there's some articles I can send you on the struggles of students as a result of remote learning, the impact of learning loss on mental health. I can send that. Lisa or Karen, remind me tomorrow to send that out. We got it yesterday at the superintendent's meeting. Anyone else with any suggestions, feedback, dialogue? Okay. This has been helpful for me. And so I hope that when we have our meeting next month, it's on April the 13th, that we'll be able to give you the skeletal plan, tell you where we are with some of the information from Thought Exchange, and where we are with some of the great suggestions that we heard tonight. Is there anything for the good of the order before we let you guys go? Okay. If not, then take care, everyone. Remember to wash your hands, wear your mask, and practice social distancing. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.